Hello everyone and welcome to day 19 of Terrorthon Murder Mysteries. I'm sure it comes as no surprise to you that despite all of the serial killers out there who have been caught and identified, an equal amount remain either at large or dead and never identified. And I would like to run through some of the more famous cases with you right now. Starting with Mary Rogers. Mary worked in a New York City cigar shop in the 1830s, and her beauty was so legendary that she was visited by famous authors such as Washington Irving, who wrote Sleepy Hollow. She was engaged to a cork cutter named Daniel Payne in 1841. And then on Sunday, July 25th of that year, she went to visit relatives in New Jersey. And while she was in New Jersey, a storm hit, and her mother assumed the delay of her return home was caused by this fierce weather. But then on July 28th, Mary was found in the Hudson River. She looked as if she'd been beaten to death. Her fiancé Daniel was suspected, but nothing was ever confirmed as to the killer's identity. Then in October that same year, Daniel Payne went binge drinking and bought laudanum from a pharmacy, and was then found dead on a bench where Mary's body was brought to shore. He had died of a broken heart, essentially. This story was adapted by famous Gothic author Edgar Allan Poe, and that was then adapted into a movie in 1942. Jack the Ripper. Now, who hasn't heard of Jack the Ripper? But a lot of you may not be familiar with the details of the case. So Jack the Ripper was active in London 1888. He was originally called the Whitechapel Murderer and the Leather Apron. He was guilty of at least 5 murders. He actually devised the name Jack the Ripper himself in a letter that he sent to the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, which contained half of a preserved human kidney. This letter was later known as the From Hell letter. His likely background was as a surgeon, and there was definitely a sexual element to his crimes. He mostly murdered prostitutes and would stab their vaginas and rip their abdomens open, all with a single knife. Over 2,000 people were interviewed and over 300 were investigated in detail, but the identity of Jack the Ripper was never confirmed. And there's a whole study devoted to uncovering his identity, known as Ripperology. If you want more details, there is a plethora of movies about Jack the Ripper to choose from. I recommend From Hell, starring Johnny Depp. The Black Dahlia. Real name Elizabeth Short. She was found murdered in Los Angeles January 15th, 1947. She was last seen in a cocktail lounge less than half a mile from the hotel she was staying at. She was found severed at the waist, completely drained of blood, leaving her skin a pale white, and her face was slashed from the corners of her mouth to her ears in what's known as a Glasgow smile. Entire portions of her breast and thigh had been sliced away, and her intestines were tucked neatly behind her buttocks, and her corpse was posed as well. She had died around 10 hours before the body had been discovered, according to the post-mortem, so the killer had worked very quickly on her. The killer mailed her belongings to the Examiner newspaper, and over 750 investigators interviewed over 150 men, but the killer was never identified. But it's possible that the killer killed himself by drowning in the sea. The Zodiac Killer. This is the most famous unsolved murder case in all of American history, so I wouldn't be surprised if you've heard of this before. The Zodiac committed at least 5 murders between December 1968 and October 1969, leaving only 2 survivors. But he claimed to have murdered as many as 37 people. He actually coined the name himself when he sent ciphers to local newspapers, and one of these ciphers was actually only cracked in 2020, showing just how difficult these ciphers were to crack and how interest in this case has not disappeared over the years. One of the ciphers referenced an Alfred Hitchcock Presents episode known as Museum Piece, so he was a big fan of his work. He used a distinct symbol in his letters and at crime scenes, so he always left his mark, and the case remains open to this day. For an exhaustive and accurate portrayal of the case, I recommend the David Fincher movie Zodiac. And now for a more recent example, this serial killer does not have a name, he's simply known as the Phoenix serial killer. He has killed 7 people, and his modus operandi was to shoot victims with a semi-automatic shotgun, with the victims picked completely at random. So far, he has killed a 16-year-old boy, and he fired 30 times into a car, which killed a 12-year-old, her mum, and a family friend, and this all happened in 2016. There's a $30,000 reward for any information that leads to his arrest, but so far, he is still at large. So of course the majority of serial killers have been caught and unmasked, but an equal amount have never been caught, so just be wary of your new neighbour. You never know, you might be the next murder mystery. See you tomorrow.